and good afternoon to different people throughout the world here. So, welcome to Unlocking Freedom in Nature and Art. So excited to be here today. And I, of course, have my special guest, Michelle Holling-Brooks. Is that correct?
You got it. I'm so excited to be here.
And Michelle, where are you coming from?
In the world. I am in Roanoke, Virginia. So it's down in like the boot part of Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains. And so it's a beautiful little city nestled in that space. But originally, I'm from just right outside of DC. And so I kind of have that mix that you were talking about of the cityscape and the naturescape and being able to find it in all of it.
It is. It's just like going get dressed up if you want to go to town, and then otherwise you're in your country's garb, is what I call it, right?
Mhm.
So, and you definitely live in a beautiful area. Like I was telling you earlier, one of the best memories I have is horseback riding with a friend of mine back in Virginia, close to that area. And it's been like over 10 years, we'll just say. But it was such an amazing trip. And I love horseback riding. And so that in that area, it was beautiful. And of course, it was the end of October, beginning of November. So, but anyway, it was one of those memories that I'll always have because it was so beautiful. So, we are going to take you back in time here, and I want to hear your story of where you grew up. And of course, I want to hear the story about when you were 13 and what you went through. So,
What I loved about when I saw your invitation, just the transformation nature of bringing nature and art into that journey of transformation and healing and awakening is my word. And so it's nature has played a huge part for me in my journey, and art, and merging those two together and really speaking in that symbolic language that goes beyond words. I grew up just outside of DC, in a little like metropolitan, they call it like the Beltway, like kind of area just outside of DC. And at that point, it hadn't grown up too much. And so we were able to have like, more of the suburb cityscapey kind of environment with it. However, when I was about 5 years old, my mom was really struggling with me with severe dyslexia and ADHD, and they were trying to figure out, like what can we do to help this child that regular stuff is not working for. How can we help her? And one of the doctors was like, you need to try something that will help her with her executive functioning skills. So you could try like martial arts or maybe horseback riding, and it gave a couple of different things. And my mom had grown up military. My whole family was military. And so on the military bases, there's almost always a stable. And so horses had been a huge part of her life growing up. And she was like, oh, that one, because that was familiar to her and she liked it. It just so happened that we went to my cousin's down in Corpus Christi, Texas, because he was Coast Guard. They're, like I said, they're all military. And when we were out there in Corpus Christi, we went on a trail ride. And here I was, this little 5-year-old. I'm not quite sure why they put me on a horse by myself. Did. And off we went and down a ravine. His horse like took off. My horse followed him because, five don't have much control.
right.
And I thought it was amazing. My sister, who's a little bit older than me, thought it was horrible. She got off the horse and said, never again. I got off the horse and was like, "Ooh, this is so much fun." So that's kind of how that love affair with animals started for me. And
You probably weren't scared because you were younger, and she was probably a little
yeah,
bit got scared from it. So, but you know what's interesting is the fact that I didn't realize the bases had the horse stables like that.
yeah, a lot of
Interesting
bases. I don't.
fact.
Yeah, and so I don't know if they still do because a lot of bases have changed up. But yeah, horses used to be a very big part of, especially like army bases, which is what my grandfather was. Um, And so we came back. My mom did some looking around, found the local one that was out in the county next to us. So getting a little bit further out into the countryside and signed me up for lessons. And I just kind of stayed this barn rat ever since that just stayed with it. And it also set me up for an experience that I would have a few years later that really set the tone for my whole life. And kind of put me on a very specific path. So, and then I was also in Girl Scouts and everything else like that, outdoors all the time. I went to camps, all these other stuff.
So, quick question: when you
Yeah.
were doing the writing and stuff at the stables, did you help take care of the stables, take care of the horse? And because I know
Yeah.
my granddaughter, when she was doing the special writing, and they have horses and stuff. They have the
Mhm.
big. They're not the Clydesdales. Gosh, what are I? I'll think of
There's like
it.
Belgians,
Gypsies.
Percherons,
They're
Gypsy Barners. Yeah, they're super
yeah.
fun.
And so, but she had to learn all of that, which is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, the first program we went to was kind of more like they gave you the basics, but it was, it was county run. And so eventually, when I was a little bit before I was 8, I'd been at the county one for a couple of years. And then one of a writing spot opened up at a more, I don't know, show oriented barn that you had to like audition for and blah, 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 and do all this other stuff. And I rode for one of those slots and was selected. And so that barn required us to do everything. They were like, if you're going to be a writer, you also have to be a horse person. And literally, Jane Dillon, who wrote the book on equitation and horsemanship for young writers, literally, that's the name of her book, and was like known all throughout the country, taught Olympic riders and everything else like that, was that. Plus, our family was not the family that she would typically bring in. And so we were a scholarship family. And so I had to work. I had to work literally to clean and do other stuff like that to earn my spot at the barn. And so I think it also taught me something very different, is that because I was a working student and running and working that way from a very young age, um, it really did teach me the whole gamut of being with horses. So I appreciated the time in the pasture with them just as much as I appreciated hopping on their back and riding a course and doing other stuff like that. So it definitely taught me an aspect that not everybody, I now look at it and go, wow, it was such a gift to come in through that door, because I would not maybe have the foundation that actually served as my anchor after I was 13, because that was
And that's
problematic.
such an important golden nugget you just shared. Is sometimes we look at it as like, oh my gosh, I have to do this, like cleaning horse stalls or doing that. You're like, oh, this is like the worst, right? But it was teaching us a lesson. Sometimes it is best to start at ground zero, like, whether it's working in the restaurant, being the bus boy or washing dishes before being the waitress or the manager, because when you learn all the aspects, it also teaches you how to treat people or treat
Yeah,
animals, and you learn so much from that, from doing those little things.
it's definitely, it brought me into not only honoring um, the time in the saddle, it also brought me into a relationship with the rhythms of the horses and their paddocks, getting to know their personality, seeing them as something more than just like a four-wheeler that you hop on and point in a direction, like really seeing them as a being. And so that was a huge, huge component for me. So that was kind of my world. Art, therapy was a piece of my world early on because I figured out that was really good for kiddos with dyslexia and ADHD. And so all these kind of pieces were swirling around me. And at 13, the crew that could do like up and down the East Coast traveling, I was not one of those people. They had gone down to Florida and done a big show down there, and they had come back, and there had been an outbreak of equine eastern encephalitis down in Florida. And when they came back, I guess a mosquito had hitched a ride in that trailer somewhere, and it ended up biting me. And I ended up in coming down with encephalitis inside my own system.
Gosh.
Yeah, and that encephalitis dominoed into another viral disease, which was spinal meningitis in the viral form. And so these are two viruses battling it out in my head, equaled a very unhappy brain. You know, my brain itself was swelling out, my brain, the lining of my brain and my brainstem was swelling. And so all of that pressure, all of that planks equaled where my brain actually lost balance. And I ended up slipping into a coma for 7 days.
Oh,
And during that
wow.
time, you know, they were prepping my parents, like, we don't know, like, people don't survive one of these, let alone another. It was 1990. And so the all they could do, because it was viral, the antivirals and things we have now, they didn't have back then. And so they just could supplement me. They, you know, put me in one of those halos to try to like relieve the pressure to minimize the quote brain damage and hope for the best. And I always say, I pause right here and I say my family gets to tell their own side. I honor this from my point of view of what that was like for me, and they get to tell their own story if they want to. um, and also, I invite people to feel this through their own lens because we all experience something in our life that cuts us off. And what happened when I woke up from that coma is I was cut off from the ability to hear. I was cut off from the ability to see. I was white blind. So instead of like dark blindness, my eyes were so incredibly sensitive to all the pressure because this is the occipital, you know, part of the brain. The visual cortex is back here. And so all the swelling was there and the light was just too painful. It's kind of like when you come in from outside and it's really bright into a dark room, there's actually that reverse effect where it's like really like blinding light and you kind of see shadows. That's what I was seeing. I was paralyzed from the middle of my back down, but those three things as a 13-year-old would have been problematic enough. But the fourth thing that was really problematic for me was that I was completely wiped clean. I had no memory of who Michelle was. I had no memory of being a human. I had no memory of my family, of the rhythms of my life, nothing. It was all completely gone. So what I woke up as was this very kind of quote feral being that just knew one thing. I was in an immense amount of pain. I didn't know how to communicate because I didn't know that I should be able to communicate. And I didn't know how to do anything because I didn't have the association that we have to like reach for somebody or do something. Somebody once said to me, it was like being born again. I was like, yeah, but when we're in the womb, we sync to the rhythms and the heartbeat of the people that are around us, to the
Right.
rhythm of that space, to the smells, to the sense. Like we're actually syncing to way more so that when we are, quote, born, we reach for the things that feel familiar to us. All of that was wiped out for me. And so I
Wow.
was this lump of a person sitting
I
in a hospital bed.
I
Yeah.
can't imagine being a 13-year-old and experiencing that, being so wiped out. I know just from it's nothing compared to what went through. With my brain injuries, that when I lost memory, I couldn't remember people's names. I
Mm,
could recognize their faces, but I couldn't remember their names. That was scary enough for me. So to come
mm,
out at be 13 only, and I was like 22 at that time. So to be 13, having being bit by a mosquito, having that whole life that you've been doing all that stuff, and then to come out not knowing, because that means you didn't know your family, you didn't know
yeah.
anybody, you didn't know how to talk. I mean, that is just like, wow. So I want to say hi to those that are watching. Alan and Lori, welcome. So we thank you for being here. And if I'm missing, not seeing questions or your name on there, I apologize, but that's just the way Facebook Live is sometimes. But if you have questions, be sure to ask because if we don't answer them now, we'll answer them later. So thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting, but oh my gosh, I'm so excited to hear the rest of the story.
And so those next few months, I was in the hospital for 3 months after waking up, were traumatic to say the least. I at first thought I did what every nervous system does, it tries to fight, but I was paralyzed and I didn't know how to do it. So even though like I would push on people, and also I grew 3.5 inches in that time that I was in the hospital because I think my body was trying to disperse all of the swelling and the inflammation and it needed space. So I went in a little close to like 5'8" and I came out 6'1". And so
Oh,
that in
wow.
itself is a lot of pain and a lot of disorientation. And because of that, I was like this long snake string bean thing that I always lost. It didn't matter how hard I fought. And they eventually would strap me down and restrain me because I had tubes in me. I had different things on me, like they needed to protect me and keep me safe. But to me, it just felt like assault after assault after assault. And I had no point of reference because they were talking to me, but I couldn't hear them. And I started to then just track. I tracked them energetically. I tracked them the way that my system kind of like took that sixth sense that we all have when there's energy or somebody moving around us and we go kind of like, what? It honed in to those senses and just blew them up. So I started to be able to recognize and predict the different energies of the doctors and nurses and even make sense of them. If I just let them move me and I didn't fight them, everything went easier. And so I went into a functional kind of freeze and shutdown, right? And from there, though, there were three energies that I really struggled to connect with because every time they came and I saw them almost like as these shadows, I could feel that they wanted something from me. It wasn't a neutral energy like the doctors or the nurses. Instead, it was just a sense of sadness, the sense of like almost like a pull at me is how it felt energetically. And I just wanted to push at it and get away. But of course, I would get restrained every time I did that. So I learned to, again, just appease it and leave it alone. Well, those three energies turned out to be my mom, my dad, and my sister. And it was all of their grief, all of their sadness, all of their worry, all of their projections, everything that they were feeling was hitting me pretty much like an assault. And it was really problematic. So at 3 months, when I had finally learned how to push a button when I needed to go to the bathroom, and I had learned how to eat this food thing that they put in front of me, even though I had no desire to do it, I had learned the functioning basic things, and I was off all of the different supplements and other things like that. They deemed me medically able to go home and they sent me home. And the problem was, though, I was going home with the exact three energies that I didn't feel safe with. So the environment, the nature that I knew that I was going back to was a hostile one. It wasn't one that felt understanding. It wasn't one that I could get away from that pressure because at the hospital they would come and they would leave. It was in 1990, my dad was active duty Army as well. And so he was in Desert Storm. And so he was coming and going, and all of this was happening. It was a big stuff for my
Oh, I
family.
can't even imagine, and I'm sitting here thinking it's like I couldn't imagine even being your parents. But like you said, it's a different perspective from each of you because they had no clue that you had probably lost all your memory and lost all of this. Even the
Yeah, they
doctors didn't know all of this. So it's like you're training them, they're having to learn. Oh, I can't imagine the horror you were going through.
Yeah, it was just I came up with a very specific system that the human world was nothing but pain, suffering, competition, overwhelming, and you just had to appease. You just had to do what they wanted you to do, and they would go away. And that was my belief system, and that there was no place in the human system that would allow you to be you. And that's, they didn't understand whether I could talk, whether they didn't know the extent, like you said, of the memory loss, the quote amnesia. They didn't have any of that information because I didn't know to give it because I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't have any of that pieces. I'm giving words to it now, but at that moment there were no words because it was all gone. So fast forward, I'm home. I'm now in PT and OT. And so they took me to my appointments, and I had learned at this point to stop fighting. And so I was just this big, huge snake that they could move around and do whatever they want with. And if you picked up my arm and you moved it, I would let you move it. But if you dropped my arm, I had zero desire to connect with this world because as far as I saw it, there was nothing to connect to. There was nothing to draw me into it. And so the minute you let go of me physically, I went away. And I just became back to a body. I figured out, okay, these people have this weird thing that I have to like ring. It turned out it was a bell. And if I rang that, then the person didn't get frustrated because I didn't have an accident in my bed, or other stuff like that. And so that was kind of my world. I came back. And for 3 months, that's just pretty much what I did. I just kept my head down. Anytime I took my sunglasses off or my hat off and tried to engage, it was so painful because of the eye and the nervous system. My ears were somewhat able to hear, but it was like I was deep underwater. Once I kind of experienced that, I was like, oh, this is a familiar feeling. This is what I felt like back in there because it was all the fluid that was stuck in there. And I just wasn't refusing to do anything. I wouldn't do it. Uh, my mom had an idea. She said the place that Michelle thrived the most was at the barn. Therapeutic writing, this is again 1990, was just brand new, kind of working its way over to the East Coast, and there wasn't a therapeutic writing barn. So she called back up my therapy or my writing barn that I was at, which was a show barn, and she was like, "Hey, can we bring her out there?" They're like, "We're a hunter jumper, show barn. We are not a therapeutic barn, but sure, bring her out here." Um, and so they loaded me up, and I did my typical thing of not paying attention. However, when they opened the door and they brought me out into my wheelchair, the smell of the barn was something that was familiar to me. And for those of you that might not know, our scent pathways are on a different neural pathway than our cognitive memory. So it links up. That's why when you have a smell of like lavender or this, that, and the other, and it's associated with a strong connection or a memory, good or bad, it brings up a whole different type of a memory. And so when I smelled the barn, I almost like fell out of the wheelchair because I felt for the first time in 6 months post coma a sense of something familiar. And I wanted to know what that was. All the rest of the time, I never wanted to know anything. I just did what they wanted me to do and got out of Dodge. And at that moment, I actually like picked up my head. I wanted to figure out where I was at, even though I couldn't see what was happening or hear. I still felt that environment. They wheeled me around into, which was the like big, huge center stall barn. And about 4 stalls down on the left, there was something that I wanted to go to so bad. And if you've ever been in a horse like center stall, they're a little dark, they're shady, so the
Right.
light wasn't hurting my eyes as much. And so I could make out more of the shadows. And to me, the head that popped out over that stall door looked like a beautiful electric yellow highlighter. I was seeing his energy, his soul, and what that is. Because again, all those pieces kind of came online. And in real life, he's a dark bay thoroughbred, but that's not what he looked like to me. He was the most gorgeous thing. And I just knew I wanted to be next to him. I picked my hands up for the first time, put them to the wheels, and wheeled myself to his door. The wheelchair, hit the door with a lot of force, probably made a lot of noise, and it should have scared this big, huge 17-hand thoroughbred jumper that was not a therapeutic riding, but it didn't. And instead, he reached his head up and over me, Tammy, and he put his head into me and he pulled me even more into that barn door.
He
And for the
knew.
first, he knew me. Excuse me. And I knew him. I reached for the first time, that reach that we all do when we want something. For the first time, I did that. And it was to him. And he and I stayed that way, which what felt like forever to me, which I'm sure was just moments to the outside world. But as I was breathing and as I was feeling with him, I said the first words I had said post coma, which was sketchy. I shouldn't have known it. That was his name, Schedule A, and that was the nickname that I called him. And there should have been no memory for that in me. And yet there it was.
Oh,
And so while I
wow.
remembered nothing else in the whole world of me, I remembered him and I remembered the bond that we had. He wasn't even my personal horse. He was the horse at the barn that I took care of. He was the horse that I was riding. He was the horse that I had made a bond with. However, it was something that I shouldn't have had, but I did have. And I, for the first time, wanted to be in this world because he was in it. It changed
It gave you
everything.
hope, you know, and
Hmm.
it probably gave your family hope finally. You know, it's
Yeah,
like, wow.
yeah. And so the long story short, they somehow talked the people into it. They pulled out the good Western saddle that's in the back of every English riding barn. And this is not the safe part at all. Do not do this, like for real. Don't do this. They tied me to the saddle and logged me onto the horse. And so that when I fell to the side, because I was like a little weeble wobble, I had no catch. And so when I fell, I fell. And so that way I wouldn't fall too hard and they could like shove me back up because they didn't have sidewalkers or all the other things that make it appropriate. However, schedule kept took care of me. He would start to feel when I would get off balance and he would stop and give me time to kind of pull myself back up or somebody else to shove me back up. And I wanted to have more and more stamina. And they were really savvy. They figured out, like, hey, we're going to stop this horse until, she makes some type of eye contact or says something. At this point, some of the, again, as we got further and further out from the event, some of that started to come back in. It took 2 full years for both my sight, hearing, and my legs, I'm happy to say, I can to come back and do all of that. But working with him did that, and the humans would control him at first. I wanted them to get out of the way so I could just be with schedule. So then I was like, fine, I'll play with you humans. I'll be nice to you. I'll try to make these guttural sounds that you want me to make. I'll do all the things you want me to do so you get out of the way so I can be with schedule and be with that. And that became my safe place at the barn. And the human world, as I started to improve at the barn, I had to go back into the human world. And that is a tricky place for now somebody who doesn't remember it, going back into eighth grade middle school, coming back after being gone for such a long time, coming back in a wheelchair and then braces, having no idea who these people are, having a funny little guttural speak to myself. For those, they started to teach me to sign, so that was different. It was just a real hot mess in the human world
I'm surprised they
with
put you
all of
back
that.
in school, to be honest, with no memory and when you cannot really communicate with people.
Yeah, it was a problem. And it was a problem because I had learned to people please. I had learned to just appease. I had learned to say yes. And so you can imagine what that created. I call it the years of abuse because there was no part of Michelle that valued herself. I didn't know who that was. I didn't really like being in the human world. So I just did the path of least resistance. If somebody said, this is what you do, and they were going to get mad at me or they were going to like make my world feel uncomfortable, I just did whatever they wanted me to do because I didn't want the consequence because I had already been taught and conditioned from the time of not being able to move to just do it. So even though after a year of writing and working with schedule, I got back the use of my legs and I started to figure out how to communicate and I started to relearn and I was catching up quickly. And like I said, by the time 2 years was out, I was, trying out for basketball team and all this other stuff.
Wow.
Great, amazing. I looked like a functioning human, but I wasn't. It was all a shell behind it. And so I started to have these two different worlds, the world that I would show up to um, at high school at that point, and then the world of who I really was that was at the barn, when I would go out and sit in the pastures, when I would go on hikes. All these other places became the real version of me. And the human world was a place that I didn't care about that Michelle that showed up. So it was a crazy, not so great time for about a good 10 years until it felt just too much of a divide, too hard. I could not figure out how to bridge these two worlds. And slight trigger warning, schedule uh, eventually passed away. And when he passed away, the anchor that I had created to get back into the world went away. And so that was like a huge problem because now I was like, I don't know how to be in this human world. The only reason why I was willing to do it, even though at that point I wasn't riding him, I was working at the barn, working and training other horses. Um, but he was still, I would sit in the pasture with him and spend hours with him and be with him. So when he passed away, that one place that I felt I could be me was gone. And then the years of abuse really ratcheted it up. So from like 18 to 23, it got really gnarly in there. Until just at 23, I was like, this is too much. I can't keep trying to figure out how to make this bridge between who I feel I am inside and who I am in my life. Like it was just too much. I didn't know how to bridge it, tried to end it all. And luckily, this is where another animal came in. Baron, who was my German Shepherd, woke me up, kind of licked into my mouth after I had ingested a whole bunch of pills, triggered a vomiting response. And when I woke up, I could just see in him just this look of like confusion. And I could feel this true, like, why? Why don't you love yourself the way that I do? And as I was washing, the puke and the bits of pills out of my hair, slightly annoyed that it didn't work, I just kept feeling like I don't know who that person is. And I have felt it because animals don't lie. And I wanted to go find her. So as I wiped down the mirror and I looked at these just hollow eyes at that point, I was like, you have to go find that Michelle because she exists. And so it sent me on my journey. And the journey took me back out into nature because that's where I had found her to begin with,
Awesome.
back out into all those places and really um, coming at it from now. I was looking to heal myself. That first couple of years, I had healed the physical body, but the emotional, the mental, the spiritual side of me was a whole freaking hot mess. And so, how
Uh,
did I bring that back in?
oh, I can't imagine. So, Alan says that horse ranch was therapeutic. They just didn't know that at that time. That's such a beautiful story. And I want to say hi to Dale, Katie, Eva, and CJ, and I know there's even Lori and Ellen, and I know there's more, but I just
Oh,
can't see all the
hello.
names. So now it's like now you know how to help others because what you're talking about going through losing memory, you wouldn't think, you just think of physical, you don't think of the emotional or everything that you went through. I mean, so it's like, and I've heard of people coming out of comas, and I've known people that are really sick or have had head injuries, but a lot of times we don't know how to really help them. And you're putting a lot of like, okay, we need to really think about this from now on. But let's go ahead and finish your story. So at 23, your dog saved you, and so now you're going back out into nature.
And back into, I wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand how do we bridge that gap. And like the medical community had deemed me healed, but I was anything but that. I was a shell of a person. And what I started to realize, especially as I did my first part of the healing journey and then turned that into helping others on their healing journey, is while I experienced these things very viscerally, I was not unique because everybody has experienced different versions of feeling completely cut off from themselves from that experience of life. We all have different ways that we feel like nobody hears us, nobody sees us, nobody slows down to ask us. We learn to people please, we learn to fight, we learn to that we give up that worth within us because it's been taken away from us. There are so many ways that the literal version of that 10 years that I call the abuse years, that shows up for us in many, many, many different ways. And the question then was, how do we build a bridge? How do we build a bridge back to those moments that I could feel in the field with Diesel? And how do I build those bridges back to recreating that in different places and allowing that version of Michelle to be able to show up in an office building, to show up at a table with family, to show like, how does she not abandon herself in those little moments? How do I bring that who I am into these different aspects of my life? I needed a way to bridge that. And so I needed a way to come back to my own heart. And that's kind of what I went on that journey to discover. Took me into, somatic processing. It took me into parts work and to shamanic work and to wisdom teaching, all these different things. But it all came back to me taking it into my original classroom, which was the horses, which was the out in the fields or walking on the thing or sitting next to a waterfall. It's coming back to these places and allowing myself to journal, allowing myself to sketch, allowing myself to give words to different aspects of me that I didn't have words for because words were still hard. My first language really is the body. I learned to feel energetic fields. I learned to feel my own body. I didn't have words to associate with them. Like we're taught, oh, you look scared. Well, how does somebody teach you that? They look at your body and they say, that's a body that's scared. And they give us a word. Then we have a word to go with that. But before that word, we have a felt sense. We have a tightness within us. We have a quiver within us. We have a brace. We have a no. We have a, excuse me, I need something here. We have all those things, but those are restricted from us from very many different things. And just the sheer conditioning of what it is to be human restricts us. Once I started to interact with my human senses, I was like, why do we do it this way? This is crazy. Like I'm like, why do people say one thing and feel like I could feel their bodies? I'm like, that's not the way they're thinking at all. That's not what they're doing. And yet we're doing that. And so that was another thing that didn't make any sense to me because like animals are what they are. Tree, nature, it is what it is. And it doesn't try to be anything else. And it doesn't try to, when they're domesticated, they get some quirks to it, just like we get quirks to us from our domestication, from our conditioning, from our ways in which. But left to our own devices, we want to be in balance. We want to be in connection. We want to be in community. We want to be in a place of support and joyful service to each other. Think of horses that groom each other. They want to be in that community and in that support and being just with each other, chilling, being in that space, and then also coming back out. So yeah, I'll pause there. I've been talking for quite a bit. Does anybody have any questions or
Well, it's been
thoughts or
so exciting. Because there's so many nuggets and so many different questions because how does your because I can't imagine having a child go through that and being the witness to that. How hard that would be. I just had a great niece that had to have surgery on her neck because the spinal fluid was leaking and some different things,
oh yeah,
and
that's so
that was
painful.
scary.
Oh,
Thankfully,
I know.
she's fine. It's coming through. She's in recovery, but it was scary for a few days there. Uh, but and not having, and I totally get what you're saying though. Senses of smell. I smell things, and I'm like, oh, that reminds me of my grandparents walking down a path, or this smell, or that smell, or I'll hear things. I use my different senses when I go into the woods. We live in the woods too, but there's just different sense. Like you said, you use all of your senses when you can, but I can't imagine waking up and not knowing anything. And I'm
Well,
sure
you don't
that
know what
was
you don't know, so that there's that,
right.
like,
But
but it's a very, because our nervous system is based off of being able to predict, being able to know, then we feel safe, a felt sense of safety when we can predict something or have the illusion of prediction. Then we feel a felt sense of safety in our body, even if we don't like what we can predict. So not being able to predict anything and not having that made my nervous system feel not happy.
So how would you have wanted because your mom and dad and sister were scared because they were probably scared they were going to lose you and they weren't sure what was going on. How would have, and like you said, you felt afraid of them. It's like, what would have been a better response for them?
Um, like let's take it to how can we treat these parts of us? Because basically, I was a part of me. Like if we think about a part of us that's scared or nervous or feels cut off, like when we're struggling, right? That part of us that's having a struggle moment isn't the adult functioning version of us. It's usually a younger child, a scared part of us, a wounded part of us, some other aspect than who we currently are is showing up and driving the bus within us. So when that happens, what can we do to meet that part without driving it further into fight, fight, or freeze, which is what happened with me, with everybody. And it's one, meet it with compassion, slow way down. Like when we have that part of us that's struggling, that's overwhelmed, that's scared, like a cornered animal that's shivering, and we don't want to, we all want to go to it and pick it up and be like, oh my God, you're amazing, we love you so much, like no. Like, nope, let's be the rock instead, like channel the rock and just sit with it and just breathe with that aspect of us, and um, start to, where can I find that sense of connection? Where can I see that nonverbal kind of like softening? Where can I feel in my body a kind of an opening, a releasing of attention, even just a little bit? Because if we try to slam something with what is wrong, what can I do to fix you, how do I need to do it, these parts of us just go further to ground, or they get pissed and then they fight back. And so then our whole system pushes and fights. And now we're in that tug of war that I was in. And that when we end up in a tug of war with ourselves, one part of us is going to win and one part of us is going to lose. And that creates more and more separation, more and more disease. But if we can work with ourselves from a wholeness place of saying, hey, I want to connect with you just as you are. I don't need you to be anything. I'm willing to help you guide me. And that's what Schedule taught me. He's what I call my first teacher in the sacred witness. He didn't try to change me. He didn't try to have me show up a different way to begin with. He just said, hey, I'm willing to be with you just as you are. And I'm willing to attune to you as you are. I don't need you to be the writer that you were before. I am willing to meet you exactly as I am. And that's one of my favorite teachings that has come to him is, am I willing to love who I am right now? Not who I was 2.5 seconds ago, not who I was when I'm having an embarrassed flash or whatever that is. Am I willing to love and to meet myself at exactly as I am? Nature does that. Like imagine a tree being like, I'm not going to give myself photosynthesis today because I had a rough day yesterday. I mean, no, like it's not going to do that, right? Like it's just,
It
it's
doesn't. I love this was such a great answer though. I totally get the visualization just because I see animals all the time and we just sit and watch them and they'll come up closer and closer, or like we adopted two kittens and they were a little bit older, but we didn't, I don't believe in ever pressuring anybody or any animal. I always want them to come to me,
yeah.
and that, so that it's a different attitude and people need to look at that. It's like you should never pressure somebody, you never should pressure a child, to hug you or to come up to you just
Mhm.
because you may know them. It's like, no, you can come to me. And sometimes that's hard for us, but we need to learn to do that because that's how we'd want to be treated. And what is so sad here, Michelle, is time is flying fast. And I know you have a time limit today, because you have several things going. I can't believe how fast it's gone by. This has been an incredible story. And of course, I love having you. But go ahead and tell us what you do and how you help others now. And we're just going to have you back on.
Yeah, I would love to come back. I love your community and I think it's super fun. Um, yeah, so what I do now is I take that whole journey and that wisdom that Schedule started me on, and the wisdom from what I call the trauma years and the journey back. I have taken that, and in 2008, I founded Unbridled Change, which is a nonprofit organization that's a healing and wellness organization. Horses are a part of it, of course. So I do equine partner psychotherapy and coaching because they're a huge part of my original journey. But in about 2013, 2014, the horses, I could really feel them being like, it's time to step out from kind of behind them because they were kind of like my little shields. I was like, oh, the horse. And it was like, we need you to be the mouthpiece for this because I would be working with people and just what we were talking about, that ability for us to be able to say yes, no, and maybe, to believe in ourselves, to define that bridge back to our authentic voice and letting that come out and be a part of us. It was like that was what they taught me, and now I needed to go be the mouthpiece for that. So I opened up this whole other branch of the nonprofit where we do coaching and live classes and online classes and workshops to be able to meet people outside of the arena of the barn and open. So now I have clients all over the world that work with me and are able to bring in that. This lovely project that's right here, the Sacred Witness Oracle, is my latest publishing book. I have a couple books out there, but the pretty much bringing it all together into my book, Trauma Informed Enlightenment, which just came out this past fall. And it's a step-by-step workbook of how to build that bridge back to our true self. And so that's what I do now, is taking all that wisdom and that learning. I've been doing it since 2008 on this scale, but obviously started a little bit for that. So now a little over 20 years of trying to pay it forward and help other people and find that schedule within themselves, right? Because eventually that's what I realized is I needed to become schedule with inside of me and allow that to come in. So that's my mission now, is I like helping other people find that jewel, that wisdom, that light within themselves.
Oh, well, it's such amazing stories. Thank you so much for sharing that. I would have never known you gone through so much trauma like that, and all from a mosquito bite.
Who knew, right?
You never know, and it doesn't mean just that that's where you wear your bug repellent and stuff. But be careful.
Vaccinate your horses, please. If you have horses, please vaccinate them.
you know, um, but you can't be scared of stuff because you just don't know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But I am just so
grace
glad you
is
are
preloaded.
here,
Yeah.
and it's an amazing story. I'm so glad you are a part of our community now. So that is amazing. Welcome.
Yeah.
We love having you here. So, and I just want to say thank you. Check out Michelle's books, and we'll be sure to bring her back on so you can but if you have questions, be sure to ask them. So,
Yeah, I'll
also,
definitely hop on and try to answer questions if people want to put them in the whatever post you create for it. I'll be more than happy to answer them in there.
awesome. So, yeah, because I can't always see the questions just the way the Facebook Live does it. So, anyway, thanks everyone from being here. I can't believe how time flew so fast, right? But be sure to check out Michelle's website. Be sure to check out my website, unlockingfreedominnature.com. I do have a retreat coming up in July, which I do have Corinne coming in to help. Even though I teach art, but she's gonna come in and teach some watercolor, so which would be fun. So anyway, thank you everyone. We have an amazing community, amazing leaders. Be sure to check out Monday Marketing. They will post their books and different events they have there on Mondays. So, but thanks again for being here, and I am sure that Michelle shared something that was so positive that will help you throughout the week. So have a great week. Bye, everyone.